I'm more of a lipstick person nowadays, but it is my lip balm, actually, that is world famous. Since 3 gentlemen at a chess tournament accused me of cheating with a supercomputer in said lip balm. The New York Times, New York Post, and many other media outlets around the world have written about my lip balm. Quite a story, not a new one, but one of the most absurd ones in the chess world, so it's high time for me to show you the game I was accused of cheating for. I'll tell you about the story, how it felt in first person, and then break down the game, as well as show you the score sheet of the game so that you can see the time management. The game analysis is brought to you by DecodeChess. Thanks so much to DecodeChess for partnering up with me in order to show you what an explainable AI would think about the moves I made. And at the end of the video, you will also see my thoughts about fair play and the cheating situations in general in the world and what we could perhaps do about it. As if I had known. Haha. The story takes place in 2007, end of the year between Christmas and New Year. 20-year-old Anna, woman international master at the rating 2293. This tournament for me was a great chance as a training tournament to get better at chess without having any pressure on my shoulders. I really wanted to make it to the Olympic team, and I was training really hard to make it one day. I was ranked number 22 with so many international masters and grandmasters ahead of me in the field. I wouldn't have even dreamt about leading the tournament or winning it, but I almost did. I won my first 4 games, including a win against the highest rated grandmaster in the field, Grandmaster Christian Bauer, the strongest player I beat at the time, rated 2634. That's the game I'm gonna show to you guys. After winning a few more games, also losing one middle of the tournament, I still ended up leading somehow after 8 rounds. I'm in first place, there's 1 more game to go, and if I draw or win in this final game, I'm winning the tournament. A 20-year-old girl who's not supposed to be leading, definitely not according to my rating at the time, but I was playing at my very best. This was my peak performance and I almost got a Grandmaster norm for it, hadn't it been for the last round opponent of mine accused me of cheating. There were 3 gentlemen in the field, 3 titled players, that just couldn't believe it, that I could play this well. They ended up coming up with a theory, wait for it, that I had a microchip in my lip balm that I would open, and when I lift up the lid of the lip balm, I would see the chess move that I need to make on the board, because the lip balm would be connected with a wireless internet connection to my backpack, and that transmits the right move to the lip balm. Yeah. Honestly, I would have laughed back then. I thought it was great as a joke. Very, very funny if it was just gonna be a joke. But they weren't joking. They asked the arbiter to go and check my things, take my backpack away, and also ceremonially open the lip balm to check what's inside this magical box. And guess what he found? Lip balm. Because when the arbiter approached me, he didn't explain who said what. He just said, Anna, a few people say you might be receiving outer help. We just want to make sure everyone is calm and we'll take your backpack away. We know that this has nothing to do with you. Literally, the arbiter was apologizing, by the way, for doing all this to me, because the organizers, the arbiters, most of the players didn't believe any of this right from the start. They just wanted to calm down this 3 people. So I ended up playing the last game against one of my accusers. I was reaching out to shake his hand and he didn't even look at me as a greeting. I thought maybe he just doesn't shake hands with women for greeting. Okay, then the arbiter says, please start the clocks. I'm trying to shake his hand again and he just shakes his head. I looked at him like, what is going on? And he says, you don't play fair. I say, I don't play fair. And he's like, you don't play fair. And we start the game without a handshake and in this very friendly atmosphere where I now understand that my opponent sitting right in front of me is one of the people that accused me of cheating. I think present day Anna would have stood up for herself. At least I sure hope I would have said something. But back then, at the age of 20 and under the shock of this whole situation, I just let everything happen. My backpack taken away, my items checked, my opponent not shaking my hand, and here I am, still playing the game against him. He He played an anti-engine variation, and every time I tried to stand up to go to the bathroom, he quickly rushed to make a move so that I would have to come back to the board immediately. We ended up in a middle game position that was about equal, and yet we were both playing it for a win. He wanted to win because now without my backpack and my secret lip balm strategy, I had to play all by myself, so I would be a lot weaker than how I did earlier in the tournament. I wanted to beat him because I was hurt. I thought this whole situation was extremely unfair, and I didn't understand how on earth they are even thinking about me using a lip balm engine. It made absolutely no sense, and I wanted to prove it on the board, but I couldn't. I wasn't in the right frame of mind, and if I know anything about myself, is that I need my peaceful Zen mode to play my best chess. It was quite the contrary. It was an Anna that was furious and upset. It's not easy to upset me, but that man did upset me a lot. I ended up losing the game, and it didn't bother me that much, the result. But what bothered me is what they did to me, and the whole situation being just very much a humiliating one. A lot of players came to comfort me, and at the closing ceremony, even though I didn't win the tournament, when my name was called, I got the biggest applause. It certainly felt amazing that everyone stood on my side, including the Grandmaster whom I beat, the strongest opponent of the tournament, Christian Bauer, defended me immediately, and the game that I played against him, I'm about to show it to you, is hopefully a good example of how you can too have a remarkable performance, and it does not necessarily mean that you have a supercomputer in your lip balm. So let's get to the game. This is round 2 of the tournament. The highest rated seed is my opponent, Grandmaster Christian Bauer, and I'm playing as a humble woman international master with the black pieces. My opponent goes for b4, an opening you don't really see on Grandmaster level on the orangutan. But I guess he just wanted to play something offbeat where his experience and knowledge would be the main factor in the middle game to outplay me. I push e5 because that's the only thing I knew about the orangutan, that you could go for this line where after bishop b2 you trade your e pawn for the b pawn, and this bishop will eventually have to retreat later to b2, especially after you castle or push d6. But this is all my opening knowledge about the orangutan. I read it in the book Black is Okay by Grandmaster Andras Adorjan. My opponent, instead of going for the pawn trade, plays a3 to defend the b4 pawn. And here I start thinking d5 is very logical to conquer the center, and after bishop b2 I need to find a way in which I can hold on to the pawns. So I played knight d7, not to c6, because if you develop the knight to c6 later, this pawn in the future could attack you. So I decide knight to d7 is a better setup, and after e3, bishop to d6, c4. Now this is basically a reversed color Sicilian defense, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna take it because I don't want you to push c5. c6 is what Stockfish wants to play here. Yeah, I guess I could have strengthened my center with c6, and then it's all very pretty. I should not be too afraid of c5. But hey, I thought I'm gonna take this pawn just to avoid any trouble, any headaches against my pieces. After bishop takes c4, I develop my knight to f6, ready to castle kingside. And so I did. Now that the pawn is well protected, I'll still need to develop this c8 bishop, but I figured since the knight is kind of stuck on d7 guarding my pawn, I should fianchetto with b6 and bishop b7. This to me seemed like a reasonable setup. Yes, I probably didn't play the most accurate way, but hey, I have developed my pieces and I already castled. My opponent hasn't yet. a6 here is a move I'm proud of, because up until here, this was all about just, I need to castle, I need to develop my minor pieces. But in this moment, I had to come up with a plan. So let's take a look at my score sheet for the first time. This is my lovely handwriting, and it's in Hungarian, so here's a bit of help. Oh, which piece is what in Hungarian language? Apart from that, I guess the squares and numbers you will recognize if you can read my handwriting. Apologies. Move 10, a6. That took me a good 10 minutes of thinking. I write the time, the starting time, and then how much is left. So we are starting at 1:30, and then you see the time ticking down. a6, and then b5, the follow-up pawn push, was another 8 minutes. Overall, almost 20 minutes on these two pawn pushes, because I was quite unsure. What am I supposed to do? I guess I felt the need to expand, but if I push c5 immediately, white might just keep the position closed with b5. So it made sense to me that I go b5 first and then try to push c5 at the same time, because my e5 pawn is vulnerable. I didn't think I can go c5 immediately. I played rook c8, but this move does allow white to prevent my push. If I get to move my pawn to c5 and trade on c5, I think my position is great with the c file opening up against the queen. But yes, d4 is possible, and I calculated it. I'm proud that I did take into account that my opponent will most likely stop me from my plan. And then, after the trade, white needs to take back with the pawn in order to keep that c5 square under their control. So we end up having a very interesting structure. White has an isolated pawn on d4, and I have a backward pawn on c7 with a rook on c8 that's not doing anything. In this position, black played bishop d5. It is good because it threatens to play c6. Wow, that certainly wasn't my thinking that I'm threatening c6, but I did realize that that bishop on a2, my opponent's bishop on a2, is a key piece. If I move my rook to e8, my f7 pawn is vulnerable. So it makes sense to trade the light squared bishop, but I certainly didn't think c6 was my threat. The cool thing about this bishop d5 move, I remember that I thought to myself, white would prefer to keep the light squared bishops on the board, but if you need to go bishop b1, then something has gone wrong. That's gonna be blocking the a1 rook, cutting the connection between the two rooks, and if I don't get checkmated, that's a very, very crowded situation there on the queen side. So my opponent ends up taking, and after knight e4, in this position, black played knight to b6. Yeah, that's my move. Oh, and it's a good one. But it wasn't that clear cut to me when you see how long I have spent on this knight move. Move 16 with the black pieces. I'm now down to my final 34 minutes. Starting at an hour and 30, I have already used almost a full hour and we are still on move 16. So maybe I somehow figured that I'm gonna head over. Obviously, I see the c4 square and I think to myself, I need my knight to get there. But by going toward the queen side, I also was really aware of the fact that my king is pretty lonely. I don't have many defending pieces. So that was one of my main concerns, that if a knight g5 move appears, rook's coming to e1, as the engine is suggesting here, DecodeChess is explainable AI saying this position is about equal, but why should beware of black playing rook e8? Well, I was more scared of a kingside attack, to be honest. My opponent plays rook a d1. It made sense to me to bring it to where the isolated pawn is, and the other rook can come to e1. But really, that knight g5 move in the future is what was freaking me out. That's why it took me even longer to understand whether I should go knight c4, c6. Is a move that came out of semi-desperation, because my pieces are stuck. I need to move my queen somewhere too, but if I go to d7, knight c5, I don't want to step into that knight c5 jump, so I'm creating some space for my queen in the future on the c7 square. Knight to c5 was played by my opponent. Luckily, the AI agrees with me when it comes to only moves. Well, it was the only move that defended the pawn, and knight to c7. Both of them are very ugly, but sometimes you just gotta go with the ugly move. Knight to c7 is uglier in a way that this passive knight has no prospect. I don't have a plan. The good thing about rook a5 I noticed is that, yeah, even though it's not a dream move, but I could push a5 sometime in the future and open up the a5 for my rook. So that made sense. And also a5 will weaken the b4 pawn. So yeah, ugly move, but it was born out of necessity. Queen to c7. Finally, I managed to find the square for my queen, as I said about the c6 move. That was the point. And now g3, so that my opponent can move the knight away. Here in this position, I played h6, and according to DecodeChess, it's a decent move. It's a decent move because I threatened to play a5. I played h6 for the reasons I've been mentioning for so long. I was freaking out on that king side attack, and still it will happen. It will happen. h6 stops the knight from getting to g5, but wait for it. Now that knight is coming to f5. It's coming to f5. Black has a big advantage according to DecodeChess, but that's not how I felt. If you see the arrows that DecodeChess is drawing right now about the knight maneuvers, the white pieces coming toward my king, that's what I saw partially. Of course, I didn't see any of a forcing line or how it's gonna happen, but when you see your opponent's knight landing on f5, queen coming toward the king, bishop dropping back to c1-2 to sacrifice on h6, I was terrified. I was really worried that this will end up badly. At the same time, I had nothing to lose. So the good thing on my side was that I'm playing against someone who is so much stronger than me, so much more experienced. I'm here to learn. So if I get checkmated, I guess that's what has to happen. And I'm gonna try to do my best and play the moves that make the most sense to me. So what made some sense to me in order to not get checkmated that quickly is to have my bishop guarding my king, and for that reason I free the f8 square. That's where I want to drop my bishop in order to have a bit of help, rescue to my king. So the good thing is I wasn't worried about the result, but here I am trying to make the most out of the position, trying to play the best moves. Knight f5 is good according to DecodeChess here. And finally, now that my king is somewhat better protected, I can go for a counterattack on the queen side with a5. And that's the move I wanted. b4 is attacked, the a file is opening up, he trades on a5, I take back with the rook, and now queen e2. This is again a moment where Black has a big advantage according to DecodeChess, but should beware of white playing bishop takes h6. First of all, I didn't think I felt that comfortable or even optimistic about my chances. I didn't certainly think I have any advantage, but I did see bishop takes h5 as a future issue. When the queen comes to g4, suddenly my king side could collapse. So after queen e2, I came up with this move that I'm really proud of. I think in this game I'm the most proud of the rook moves. Let me show you again the score sheet. How are we doing in terms of time management? This is move 25. Both my opponent and I are below our final 10 minutes. There was a 30-second increment per move, but no additional time when hitting move 40. Sometimes there is an additional half an hour when you reach move 40. In this tournament, it was an hour and 30, an hour and a half for the entire game with a 30-second bonus. So we're pretty much living off of the bonus time from here on for the rest of the game. Then this is gonna be a long one. You see 65 moves. Buckle in, but certainly too, this is the most complex part of it. So not getting checkmated is priority. I moved this rook back because I realized on a5 it no longer is doing anything. I can't capture the pawn on a3, but if I drop the rook back, maybe one day I could take the e file. Not immediately, because I'm gonna be giving up a rook for nothing, but in the future it makes sense to connect the rooks. And if the queen goes to g4, yeah, I'm scared, but if I survive the attack, I could then trade rooks on e8. My opponent goes queen g4, and yes, bishop takes h6, knight takes h6. All of these moves that DecodeChess is saying were, of course, terrifying. So I had to play king h8. I think this is the only move. I don't know what else could you do against those. And this plan, rook e8 I saw, knight e7 I didn't really consider, but it makes sense to try to get rid of the f5 knight because that's a very strong attacking piece. Knight c4 I was looking at, but I did not think I have time to go for the a3 pawn. So king h8 for now, because I have to try to not get checkmated. What happened afterwards is really interesting, because here, queen h4, now again, I feel like there's gonna be a sacrifice on h6, so what can I do? DecodeChess is telling me that King H7 here would have been a really good move to feel safer. Yeah, it does support the pawn at H6 and threatens to play Rook E8. You can also click on these, by the way, to see further explanation and a detailed line in each case of why that move would have been so important. It didn't want to stop earlier because you could more or less figure out with logic what to play, but here the position becomes extremely concrete. And in concrete lines, calculation is key. The engines are so much better at calculation than any human brain. So here I am to learn that King H7 was a better move than my one, and it would have guarded H6. I for sure looked at King H7 in order to feel safer, but I don't think I felt safe about it at all, because if King H7, I feel like this knight could come to E4, threaten knight G5 check, and I still think this is hella scary. How am I gonna defend against this? Let's decode this one too. Let's decode this position too. The deep decoding is still taking place, and yet it already is saying that Rook E8 is the best move, and just not caring about that knight G5 check that's coming my way. Good moves are Rook E8 and knight to C4. Man, I wish I was as cold-blooded as the AI here, Stockfish, that is, that DecodeChess is using, and explains the thought process of Stockfish in words and sentences. I leave this position to you guys if you want to analyze it further, because I certainly didn't have much faith in it. Instead of this, instead of King H7, I decided I'm just gonna try to trade rooks and pray. Because my calculation was the following. Yes, white can take. Just as DecodeChess is pointing out, white can, and perhaps should, take on H6, and then take with the bishop again, threatening with the discover check, so I have to take the bishop, and after queen takes H6, King G8, if the rook could come into the game, if there was a rook left, Rook E4 or Rook E5 and then a rook check, I would get checkmated. But thanks to this Rook E8 move, I don't allow it. I'm gonna trade the rook before it checkmates me. So this is the only thing that made me hopeful that if you can't bring the rook in, then you don't have checkmate, and the only thing that white could do here is to keep this check coming. Queen G5, Queen H6, perpetual check is the most that white has in this position, because you cannot bring the rook into the attack. You can try to bring the knight, but it's not the same to bring the knight when it comes to this square on F6 already being guarded, and I think this is too slow. I would assume this is very slow. Let's take a look too. Okay, Rook E6 I think I would have figured out. Get the rook also into the defense, going toward the G6 square, chase the queen away. If Queen G5, I can just give this queen another kick. Go back! Leave my king alone! This would have been fine. This would have been fine. So my calculation pretty much ended with the conclusion that if my opponent takes the pawn, that is, in this position, then that will lead to a draw. And the draw against the Grandmaster, 2600 rated, man, that's not bad. So here I am, waiting for his move, and he plays King to G2. It's not the sacrifice, but that confirms my calculation, so I feel somewhat calmer that I didn't miss anything with that attack. If he couldn't take on H6, or at least he didn't think it would lead to more than a draw, he doesn't want to take, he doesn't want to go for a draw. And this is what my trainer called after the game the 65th square. My trainer said I won the game on the 65th square because according to the engine, you see that I'm better here. White had to go for the perpetual check. Sometimes a draw is the best you can get out of the game, and in this position, because my structure is better, if I manage to trade pieces and get into an endgame, I'm gonna have some advantage. So of course up to debate whether I can win it or even, you know, not get checkmated because I blunder something. But objectively, as you can see too, pointed out by the engine, this wasn't a good idea for my opponent, because now I start threatening with the trades, the rook trade, the queen trade, and if I get to an endgame, those d4 and a3 pawns are terribly weak. So when it comes to calculation and realizing that perpetual check is the best that my opponent had, he saw it. Of course he saw the sacrifice on h6, but he didn't want to make a draw, and he believed that if the game continues, he will have chances. I mean, I would have believed that too against myself. I know how much I'm capable of blundering, making mistakes, but now that I haven't gotten mated, I suddenly start hoping. And again, he makes a move, queen g4, that shows that the sacrifice was leading to nothing but a draw, and he doesn't want a draw. Maybe it was no longer a draw even, but he should have taken earlier. He should have. King h7. Here, again, that king h7 move, man. I didn't think that king h7 was this strong, that even when I'm not getting checkmated, I should have gone there with the king to then push g6 and chase the knight away. Oh man. Threatens to play knight c4, supports the h6 pawn so that I could push g6 later, controls g6 as well. I didn't really consider those as priority, but I did want to chase that queen further back. So I played knight f6, and after queen to f3, knight bd5. So I'm kind of regrouping my pieces in a way that I'm going toward the king side further, and I had a plan. My plan was that if I can trade my bishop for this knight on c5, it's not a trade I was that keen about, but then I'm gonna get my queen to e4 and I can trade queens. And at this stage, we have no time. I don't want the queens on the board when I can blunder by having a queen around the board. I feel like my king is still somewhat more exposed. I need an endgame. I love endgames. As a kid too, I loved endgames. When I see a chance for trading a queen, I go for it almost always. And in this situation, certainly, since I was struggling with my king so long, down to 3 minutes here, my opponent has 1 minute. We are living off of the increment, and he plays g4 with only half a minute left on the clock. Here comes my master plan. Here comes my master plan, because g4 again, even though white doesn't have many attacking pieces, you see that h4, you see what DecodeChess is drawing there, h4, g5, if the h file opens up, that rook coming to h1, I could still get into trouble. So Anna here, finally that plan with bishop takes c5 makes a lot of sense. You take this and then queen e4, and white cannot prevent the trade of queens because of the diagonal, that pin. You could argue that he should have played something instead of g4. Yes, true, but DecodeChess says g4 was strong, because how do you prevent it? Even if the king drops back to the back rank, I will still take the knight and I will still play queen e4. So even without the king being on g2, this is still really strong because it attacks the queen and attacks the knight on f5. You can't really get out of it even if it's not pinned, and my queen on e4 is brilliantly placed. So this is something, I think the rook moves, rook a8, rook a5, then rook back and rook trade, and this position about realizing that once I regroup my knights and then I'm threatening to take on c5 to bring the queen to e4 is another part of the game I'm very proud of. I'm proud of this maneuver with the knights and then the trade to go queen e4. My opponent plays h3 to guard the g4 knight, and here I played king g8 and DecodeChess agrees with me. This again is a situation where I know that it's gonna be an endgame, but I don't want to be the first to take the queen. I'm waiting for my opponent to take my queen. So what is a useful move here? Nothing is hanging, nothing can be taken. I can't really move my knights because one is guarding my queen, the other knight is in the way of the white rook. I don't want to move any of my knights. My rook is okay on a8, so my worst piece literally is my king. And in an endgame, you need your king to be active. You cannot leave it in the corner. You gotta bring it. So I thought, you know what? We're gonna trade queens, so here I am. Long king maneuver starting now. On move 34, just wait until the game finishes and how that king will become the hero of the story. Spoiler alert! Anna, stop spoiling it. Queen takes, knight takes, and this is where my opponent made a mistake. Knight to d4 would have been the right move, as DecodeChess is pointing out, because knight to d4 attacks my pawn. So even though the c5 pawn is hanging for white and the a3 pawn is weak, at least after knight d4 he's also targeting the base of my pawn chain. This would have been the best move. And the fact that if we end up trading the c pawns, my d5 knight is undermined, the rook is active, this would have led to quite a balanced position. I don't think I was gonna give up the pawn, but I don't know if I would have seen any of this. This is the line DecodeChess suggests, with knight jumping to c3 and then b4, so that after the trade my knight is guarding the c6 pawn. I'm not sure I just saw this, honestly. I don't remember, and I had just a minute or living off of the 30-second increment, so it could have been a lottery. But luckily for me, my opponent too made a mistake. So I may have given up most of my advantage because of this queen trade and such, which I felt was a natural continuation. But here he also made a mistake which gave the advantage back to me. He played a move that later he considered the main reason for his loss. Instead of knight to d4, he went bishop to b2. That's a move that attacks the g7 pawn, but after f6, the issue is that now if you play knight d4, I can take on c5, and after knight takes c6, look at this. Knight check here, the king has to move, and that knight is now landing on d3 with a tempo, attacking the bishop, and if I get to capture the bishop or chase it away, the a3 pawn is dead as well. It is. After king f3 here, you can see that the knight move escapes the capture, threatens to capture the bishop, and also supports my knight on c5. Just a little detail that the knights are again buddies, helping each other. There's no way for white to keep the pawn. There's literally none, because whether you guard it with rook to d2 or whether you drop back to bishop c1, I will take the bishop and I will take the pawn with a check. It doesn't matter that my knight is hanging, because this is a check, and then I can jump away with the knight. I could decode all these positions. If you click on the plus, it will go into even further depth in these positions too, but I think this is more than obvious, so we're gonna focus on the game. After knight f to d3, my opponent played bishop d4. Best move according to DecodeChess, because at least it makes my knights be in a very tangled up situation. The d3 knight is depending on the c5 knight's protection, and the c5 knight is depending on the d3 knight. So how will I get out of this? Well, I'm not sure yet, but here's the free pawn and a threat of a discover check. I am threatening to run away with the knight, jump away, and give a check, at least a check. So my opponent plays bishop e3, which is the best move here, and now b4. It's a pass pawn, it's gotta run. You have a pass pawn, you gotta push it. Push and baby, as we learned from Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan. b4 is very logical in that sense, and for now, I'm still defending all my pieces. Knights defending knights, rook is helping too, and now the new pass pawn. You know what? I don't want to give up my pass pawn, so let's push it further. Knight to b4 was a tricky move. It's a tricky move by my opponent, and DecodeChess agrees as well that knight b4 is the best practical chance here to try to do something about that mass of pieces that I have. My knight on d3 is really strong and is backed up by another knight, so my opponent plays knight to b4 to try to undermine this really strong hold that I have on the queen side. If I take on b4, look what happens to my position. Suddenly, the knight is pinned. If I defend the knight, my pawn is hanging, and the tables could easily turn. Bishop versus knight, and it's equal pawns now. My king has a still very passive location, and my pawn structure is not ideal. So this could have been still very, very unpleasant. Now, luckily for me, I didn't get too scared. We can take a look at the score sheet just on how much I wasn't scared. No, I was probably still just trying to scribble something on the score sheet under the time pressure, because I don't know how many of you know, in over the board tournaments, you need to keep writing the score sheet in a classical time control with increment. So there's a 30-second increment. You have to keep writing the moves one by one always. You cannot even group them and write 5 down. You have to write it one by one as it's happening. So we are currently on move 43. My handwriting is getting worse and worse. I even stopped writing the time down because I'm down to 30 seconds. Who wants to be annotating even the time usage when I barely have time to think about the move? So yeah, heat of the time pressure for both of us, and the quality of handwriting lowering with each and every second and the move. Let's go back to the game. Knight to b4, b2, I'm proud of, because I didn't get tricked by that knight b4 move. I didn't let it distract me. I realized that after knight takes d3, I will take back with the knight, and that guards my pawn. So what happened was knight to c2. Again, best practical chance, but my best one is already on b2. This is honestly a very, very difficult situation for white. Even if we are so low on time that this is already a blitz game situation with living off of the increment for the rest of the game, it's super difficult for white to create practical chances because that rook on b1 is stuck. You cannot move it away because I'm gonna land my rook on c1 and promote the pawn. And have I told you about the king g8 move, how that was the start of a long journey for the king that will be the hero of the story? This is what I realized. DecodeChess is saying king f7 is best. It doesn't specify that king will end up on b3 or a2, but that's where my eye was. I wanted that king to walk all the way up to a2 to attack that rook and promote the pawn. Whether it's doable, I wasn't sure, but I got a start. You know, a very long journey too starts with a tiny step, and that tiny step was king to f7. King e2 now, and after knight a4, which is a cool move to threaten knight c3. I was looking at that knight fork just in case I can get my rook somewhere quickly. King d1, moving now my rook away for that knight fork. So I guess even though I felt really comfortable about the king maneuver, yeah, this stage I'm not even sure. Everything happened so quickly that once the king got to e2, that's when I realized that there would be a knight fork. Before that, I don't think it even occurred to me to go knight a4, because that's not the most natural way to go. Knight a4 in this position moves the black knight away from danger, supports the pawn at b2, enables knight c3 check, guards c3, vacates c5 and enables rook c5. I wasn't gonna go that direction with the rook, but it's true that it vacates it, so I could go all the way back with the rook if I need to. Enables rook b3 by freeing the black rook from defending the knight at c5. All these things are so deep. I like how you can click literally on any of these to see an example line of that, what it would be like. How you can try to get to c3, move the rook away, and eventually, if the rook wasn't hanging, knight c3 was gonna win, but you can move the rook first, and now I'm threatening knight c3 to win the rook and then promote. Now my knight from b1 will be guarding the a3 rook. I did not see any of this. I'm learning too about these patterns with the knight jump and how going deeper into the details of the AI. Explaining it in words, I think, helps a lot when it comes to a variation that's so concrete that you kind of see in this case that with knight a4 the knight should be heading to c3, but everything is still tangled up because my knight on d3 is depending on the rook. So it's good to think in a more human way. That is, DecodeChess is showing you why an engine move is actually very human when it comes to explaining it in words and sentences and putting it as a thought process that a human would go through. Let's go through the thought process of what happened later too, because all these moves, as I showed earlier, did happen. Knight e2 guarding the c3 square, and again knight e2 best because of all those reasons, many reasons. I would look at reason number one being preventing knight c3, but other than that it has a whole lot of different meanings why this move makes sense. Knight e2, king e6. Here comes the journey. Here comes the journey. Now all these moves that the engine says for white, unfortunately, are out of necessity. White can barely move their pieces. The rook is stuck, the king is stuck, the knight is stuck. Only the bishop could move, but where do you go with the bishop? There's no, almost no squares for the bishop either. Very sad position for white, which makes me feel really great about the knight vacating those squares too for my king. So my knights ended up on a4 and b4 with some threats in mind, but also it paved the way for my king. Now the only piece that's standing in my way is the rook. My opponent plays f3, and here I found knight a2. Yes. I am now thinking, was I also considering, I probably was too considering moving the rook, but I didn't find the right square for it, because if you drop it back on the c5, that's not as appealing as when you could move it to b4 to support the pawn. So I think I spotted these two things, that after knight a2, I'm threatening knight c3 check, but also now my rook has more options. But I never made it to b4. My opponent, nasty opponent, prevents rook b4 by playing bishop d2. Obviously, first and foremost, preventing knight c3, but they also prevented my rook to b4 move. Rook c7 is still the best. Yay! Decoys the white bishop to a5. I didn't realize that's what I'm doing. But it threatens to play king c4. That I knew, because I told you guys that king was gonna be the protagonist. So I'm happy if I have like 50% of the reasons why each move makes sense. Rook c7. I like that the rook on the 7th is guarding my g7 pawn. Even if there's no piece attacking that pawn, in the heat of the time trouble, all I could think of is that, you know, what would be the one counter chance if somehow the bishop gets to attack my g7 pawn, if somehow the knight will get there. You just want to make sure everything is well protected when you're down to 30 seconds. I think this is very, very practical. That, of course, I have my plan to go with my king toward the pawn and have the pass pawn, but if at the same time I can drop the rook to somewhere where it prevents any kind of blunder, that gives some peace to the heart. Since my b4 square was taken, this was the second best, I guess, in my thinking. Rook c7, h4, and now here we go! King c4 to go to d3 or b3, and also supporting knight b4. Yes, true. Now that this knight on a2 no longer makes that much sense, it would be cool to bring it back. And so am I doing it, because now if the bishop takes my knight, king takes b4, that king is in check, and white is not in time to sacrifice. That's one thing I sure wanted to avoid, that there would be some kind of a way in which white can sacrifice in a decent way. I'm up a pawn, but maybe if my opponent gives up an exchange, that is a rook for a minor piece and a pawn, he could have some chances. Well, this is better. This is better that after the check, king to b3. King b3 is the best, because that's the direction I wanted to go. And I'm threatening king a2. I'm threatening king a2. So here my opponent literally has no moves but the one he played. You see, knight c5 is the one that's pointed out by DecodeChess 2 for a reason, because my king is about to land on a2. I told you guys about it. We are almost there. Let's just make a random move for white and show it on the board. How pretty is that my king could trap the rook. You can't move it, you can't defend it. I'm winning a rook if my king gets to a2. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? So my opponent plays the one move that still keeps the game going to some extent. Knight c1 check. But I calculated that I can take with the rook. Rook takes c1, threatens to play knight c3 checkmate. Yes, but also deflects the white bishop away from d2 and denies its control over the c3 square, which is very important. This supports playing knight c3 check. I was really proud of calculating it, because I'm not a tactical genius, but this calculation was not too difficult. So you see that either the rook will take my rook or the bishop. If the bishop takes, as it was explained by DecodeChess, then I have knight c3 check. I will then take the rook, and the bishop is still hanging. I'm up a piece, plus I still have my pass pawn. So this is curtains. And if rook takes, this is the game. I will simply take it and I'm up a piece. I have lost my pass pawn, but it's an extra piece. The only thing I need to make sure of is that I don't allow white to trade all the pawns on the king side. I wonder how DecodeChess would explain that here, but knight c3 is the move I made. He skips the capture of the white bishop, threatens to play knight c3, all those things later with this knight d3, knight c3. Oh, I didn't see this checkmate pattern, did I? No, I did. I did not. Did I think about checkmate with two knights? I may have not seen any of this, but it made sense to me to bring the knight because it's on the edge of the board. You want to make sure that your pieces are coming in the right direction, so knight c3 made perfect sense even if I didn't see the checkmate. So what I was saying to you guys earlier is that what I did know that I need to avoid is that white manages to trade the pawns, because this position, if you take away the pawns of the king side, is just a draw. You cannot win a game with two knights, even if my opponent loses the bishop. White could sacrifice the bishop for the pawns, train the remaining pawns. If you get rid of all the black pawns, this is a draw. So I cannot let that happen. I cannot let that happen. He didn't let the mate happen. He moved the bishop away. Maybe here I realized that I was threatening with checkmate. Who knows? I'm chasing the bishop. I'm chasing it, and then I'm bringing my king toward the king side because I know I need to win some of those pawns and create a pass pawn on the king side. That's my way to victory. So my opponent pushes g5, which is the best attempt here to threaten the h6 pawn and just try to trade pawns as I explained. g5, h takes, and key move in this position. Black played f5. It is good because it doesn't let those trades happen. It doesn't let those trades happen. King to d1. You can dig deeper in any of these positions, by the way, if you're curious. I thought it was more interesting to focus on the attack when my king was under that much pressure and all those concrete sharp lines, but you can too check out these positions. Anytime you want to see a deeper analysis, you hit plus or dig deeper, and DecodeChess will break down these positions to even further elements and explain why. Again, for instance, this pawn push is very, very important. I move my king to d3, not to allow the king to come to e2. And here, all these are quite straightforward already in the endgame. I play knight c2, but again, did I see the mate? Okay, maybe here I did. I wonder, this happened 13 years ago. I'm not even sure how many of this I saw when I could barely even write. I could barely write at this stage because of the time pressure. I gained some time with some of the 30-second incremented moves. If you play quickly, you can gain a little bit, but I went up only to a minute and a half, 2 minutes, 2.5. Okay, that part was good. Wow, I finished the game at over 2 minutes on the clock. So proud. Honestly, time trouble and having to annotate the game is not the easiest, but this stage, with a piece up, such an active king, and making sure that my pawns will stay on the board, I think made me pretty calm after g6, that there's no way that bishop can take my pawns. It's on the opposite color, and my knights will go and capture the white pawns to create a pass pawn and win the game by promotion and then checkmate. So this has been the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and at any point earlier too, if you guys want to analyze the game, I'm gonna drop the PGN in the description of the video so that you too can use DecodeChess's tool to dig deeper at any point. You initially click on Decode Game for all this analysis with the statistics. Whoa! Alright, inaccuracies 6 versus 4, mistakes 5 versus 3, blunders 5 versus 2. I mean, I guess as long as I make less mistakes than my opponent, I'm alright, unless my blunder is the last one. That could hurt the result. And yeah, you don't want to be the person making the last mistake. Last but one mistake is fine. All these details are really interesting, so do check out all the things you can do with DecodeChess's tools. And again, I decoded some of these earlier positions. That's why you see all the details. I decoded some of these attacking positions, but feel free to choose any of the earlier positions from the opening phase or the endgame if you prefer to analyze the endgame. So again, the PGN is in the description. All you need to do is copy it into DecodeChess's system. It's free to use. You can analyze your own games, the positions from the Champions Tour, any games that you are following, any position you want to learn from. You can decode a full game, you can decode certain positions and dig deeper. When it comes to, these were the summaries. Piece rolls, just what is each piece doing. Look at all those blue arrows, the threats, super important, the threats, and that's what I was looking at. Knight f5 and the queen coming toward my king with the bishop c1. Those threats I did see. I'm no stockfish, but I did see those red arrows. Not knight to f3, but knight f5, queen coming and bishop c1. That's terrifying. And I think this is one of the most useful tools for a beginner, intermediate, or advanced level 2 when you use the tabs correctly, especially when you want to train your mind to look for threats, because it's so important that you understand what your opponent is aiming for. You need to detect the threats, whether it's a direct threat. So here it's not that direct, it's not that your queen is hanging, it's not that you're in check, it's not direct, but you still need to know what's going on. Direct threats are the most important, the forcing ones, but then second step is to understand what's the plan of my opponent. And these threats that the explainable AI of DecodeChess is showing are crucial. And then you can see in words, in sentences, what's the purpose of each. Knight f5 to threaten the pawn on g7, threaten to play queen e2, then bring the queen to g4. You can go into details into these lines to see each and every position on why this is so terrifying, why is this so good for white. All of these, go into these details, check out all the tools that you can use because it's extremely helpful. Good moves and plans, sure, as well, of course. All the good moves that are possible for black, the evaluation of the engine for each, if you want to see the engine evaluations, as well as the plans. a5 and a5, idea of a5, black wants to play a5 with a small advantage, opens up the a5 there. The problem, white can play knight f5. It sure is a problem. It sure is a problem. And my king in trouble. So the solution, playing knight c4 before a5, solves the problem. Well, I was more comfortable solving the problem by dropping the bishop back here to make sure I don't get checkmated. So that was my thinking, wanting to feel safer about the king side. But as I said, all of these are extremely important details to notice, not just in this game, but in your games in general. What is my opponent doing? What is their threat? What do they want? So do check out these tools. Do check out what you can learn from an explainable AI that DecodeChess has on their platform for free. Link in the description below, and also my PGN so that you can, if you want to, analyze this game as well. And now, as I promised, the final segment. What can we learn from all this? Cheating in chess is a huge concern in the chess community for obvious reasons. We can no longer keep up with technology. The computer is stronger than the human brain, so any player that has access to an engine, whether during the entire game or at certain points of the game, will be stronger than a human being. And that's bad for over-the-board tournaments where some of the title players were caught going to the bathroom checking their smartphones, or in online tournaments where too there have been cheating cases even among grandmasters. So this is a concern, this is an issue, and organizers are trying to make sure that there are more and more fair play measures. The platforms themselves, such as chess.com, they have their own team that focuses solely on cheating cases. When you report a player, they have a specific team working full-time on the cheating cases, making sure that they ban the accounts that have gone against the rules of chess, against the rules of fair play. But it is a long road. I don't think we are yet at the perfect solution when it comes to tournaments online or over the board. What I also think, unfortunately, is a concern, at least from what I have seen in my own experience, is that yes, of course, cheating is a huge deal, and that's where most of the effort should go into when it comes to making sure that people will play fair always. But what happens when you play the best chess tournament of your lives? What happens when you perform above your rating? Is it okay to be called a cheater because you have a good tournament? Is it okay to accuse others? It's not only me who has been accused, it's just one of the many cases that a person is accused because you can't believe that they can play this well. Can you accuse people without any evidence and without any ground? Or should there be consequences to accusations? Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about fair play, cheating at chess, and also what measures would you take as an organizer or as a chess platform in the future? And how do you see the opposite side of the coin, the cheating paranoia, where anything that's remarkable has to be cheating? It cannot be an actual human performance. On the bright side, I hope you learned from the AI explanations of DecodeChess together with my human explanations of the game that I'm still extremely proud of. Christian Bauer, still the second strongest, second highest rated players that I have ever managed to beat. So I'm very proud of that game, and even though it should have been a draw if he had gone for the perpetual check, the 65th square was in my favor, and being an underdog. Thanks so much for listening to my story and watching the analysis. If you liked it, please do give it a thumbs up and consider to subscribe to the channel for more chess content. I also stream live on Twitch. That's where you can find me most days. See you there or here very, very shortly again. Bye.